Last year, we saw wide receivers like Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk, and others take it to the next level to become fantasy studs. So which guys could step up and become wide receiver ones for your fantasy team this year?
Now, if you're thinking it's May, how can you be drafting? Well, then you need to check out Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy has best ball drafts going full swing right now, all the way up until the season. They have drafts ranging from $4 to $500 with prize pools ranging from $100,000 to $15 million. That's right, $15 million in their flagship Best Ball Mania 5. If you haven't tried Underdog Fantasy yet, this is the time to do it. Just make sure when you sign up, you use our promo code ENDGAME and take advantage of this special offer. They're going to give you a special pick plus up to $250 in bonus cash. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com, sign up using promo code ENDGAME, start drafting right now, and take advantage of this special offer.
All right, let's start with your first candidate, Chris.
You know, last year I was probably a little too excited for the Chris Olave, Derek Carr connection. I mean, I don't know how I ever really get excited about Derek Carr, but you know, when you look at it last year, yeah, it didn't feel like Chris Olave had that good of a season, but overall he really did. He saw an increase in every stat that mattered, really. He saw more targets, more receptions, more yards, more touchdowns, more air yards with Derek Carr than he did the previous year. So we saw what we wanted to see from a rookie wide receiver going into year two, where he got better in every way. Unfortunately, the season was kind of a tale of two seasons. When you look at Chris Olave from weeks 1 to week 8, he averaged only 12.7 PPR points per game. Not really what you drafted him for. But then when you look at him from weeks 9 to week 17, he averaged 16.4 PPR points per game, and that included a game where he got hurt and left the game early. We saw a much better Chris Olave in the second half, and I think that's because we saw the connection with Chris Olave and Derek Carr develop in the second half. Remember, in the first half of the season, I mean, these guys were not on the same page. Derek Carr was just yelling at this guy, like losing his mind. We saw them get in sync in the second half. I think we see that the entire season this year. They're going to have a full training camp together. They've had a full season together. They're going to go into next year on the same page, not yelling at each other. And look, the Saints, despite all the rumors, you know, people thought, okay, Michael Thomas is gone. They're going to do something at wide receiver. They have to. They didn't. They did nothing at wide receiver. Chris Olave is going to be the number 1, number 2, number 3 option on this team. He's an absolute stud player, a stud prospect. As long as Derek Carr doesn't somehow get worse, which is hard to think Derek Carr could possibly be worse, Chris Olave is ready to finally smash entering year 3 and deliver on what we have hoped for and be a fantasy stud, not just the second half of the season, but the entire season.
Well, my first breakout candidate is an obvious one. I know a lot of people are going to be on Drake London. You should be, and here's why. Okay, we know Drake London was the first receiver drafted in his class. Very young still, ready for that year 3 breakout. But all of that is just, you know, kind of the superficial reason. We know what's going on in Atlanta. Big change, finally. So first of all, let's start with the quarterback, Kirk Cousins. I will just say this, it really could have been any free agent quarterback, really, maybe any rookie. Oh yeah, they took a rookie also. Even if it was just Michael Penix or somebody else, it was already an upgrade over what they had last year. Okay, Drake London has been suffering the last 2 years with miserable quarterback play. Already he's got a boost there. But I don't think we're really giving enough credit to what this offense is going to do as far as passing the ball. We know they got Bijan Robinson, sure, but they are going to pass the ball a lot more than you think. Remember, Kirk Cousins, not just last year in Minnesota under Kevin O'Connell, his whole career, he has been a gunslinger no matter where he went. That's why they brought him in, so they could win by passing the ball. He has averaged over his career as a full-time starter 596 pass attempts over the course of a 17-game season. And Zach Robinson, the offensive coordinator now, he's been the pass game coordinator for the Rams. The Rams just last year threw it almost 600 times as well, 583 pass attempts. Yes, they made this offense designed around him to pass the ball, and Drake London is obviously the number 1 target there. Look, they did add some pieces at receiver, but Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore and whoever else they have, really, is that going to be what you consider competition as far as targets? And rather than taking a receiver early, which they arguably could have or should have done, or maybe even a defensive player, for some reason they took a backup quarterback. So hey, at least Atlanta now has a really good backup quarterback situation. London is going to see a ton of targets. In year 2, he was very effective as far as 68th percentile versus man, 77th percentile versus zone, and 81st percentile versus the press, according to Matt Harmon of Reception Perception. He could do even better this year, not just with the experience and a more accurate quarterback, but also they're going to move him around in different situations, with a new OC here, instead of just lining up at the X. And yeah, he is pretty much an X receiver, but that's all they were using him, is that 85% of the time he's just lined up at the X. They could actually use his height to the advantage and use him as an oversized slot, get him in different looks and formations, and make him more effective. So if you think it seems too obvious that Drake London is going to bust out this year, it is. Take advantage of it and take him as early as the early second round. Now let's go to an offense that was already one of the best in the league in terms of passing last year, but you think there's a receiver who could get even better?
I do, and I'm really surprised you didn't pick him, but let me do the honors for you, and that is your boy, Jalen Waddle in Miami. I feel like he's being kind of slept on this year. I mean, yes, he's still going third, fourth round of drafts, but this guy has the upside to be top 10, maybe even top 5 at wide receiver. Remember, first 2 years in the league, averaged over 15 points per game, and yes, one of those years was with Tyreek Hill going over 1,700 yards. So it's not like he only did it without Tyreek Hill. Last year definitely had a dip in his production, but look, he missed 3 games due to injury, but also there were many weeks where he was banged up and still tried to play and either played limited snaps or just wasn't effective. This is a guy who has the kind of ceiling to be a wide receiver 1, not just a wide receiver 1, but like I said, a top 10, top 5 wide receiver, and he's in arguably the best offense in the NFL. Last year, the Dolphins ranked number 1 in yards per game, number 1 in total touchdowns scored. This is one of the most fantasy-friendly offenses, and I know they drafted a slot wide receiver, a speedy slot wide receiver, but I'm not worried about that at all. This is going to be the Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle show when it comes to the passing game, this 1-2 punch. And let's not forget, although I do like Tyreek Hill this year, and I think Tyreek Hill will be great, we do have to realize he's over 30 years old. We saw last year, the end of the season, he was banged up. What if he gets banged up again? What if he just loses half a step? What if they need Jalen Waddle more this year, going into year 4, entering his prime? Why can't this year be the best year Jalen Waddle has ever had and help lead teams to fantasy championships? The answer is, I think he can. So definitely look for Jalen Waddle to be a potential breakout wide receiver 1.
I'm on board with that pick. I wonder how you feel about this one, though. I'm going to talk about George Pickens again. Now, it might sound funny because part of the reasons I was just loving all over Drake London is because he's got a new coach, a new offensive system there. No longer has to deal with the Arthur Smith system. And you know who the offensive coordinator is going to be for Pittsburgh this year. It's Arthur Smith. Okay, so that doesn't make me love the offense as a whole, but it doesn't hurt the way I feel about George Pickens. Now, George Pickens, in terms of just pure raw talent, he's up there with some of the best receivers in the game, right? But that alone doesn't dictate success, especially in fantasy. You need a quarterback that can get you the ball, right? You need the right situation in terms of, getting that target share. So let's start with that. Now, first of all, we know that George Pickens doesn't necessarily need a ton of targets in order to be effective, because he did actually lead the NFL with 18.1 yards per reception last year. He can hit that home run on any given play. He can score a touchdown just all on him lonesome. As far as the quarterback goes, it's Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. Digging into this a little bit, I don't want to give him maybe too much credit, but I think Russell Wilson actually was better than a lot of people realized last year. Last year in Denver, Russell Wilson had plus 2.8% completion percentage over expected. He actually did better than he was supposed to. And we talk about adjusted completion percentage among actual NFL starting quarterbacks. He was third best. That's right, 77.9% adjusted completion percentage. Only Pat Mahomes and Dak Prescott were better. All right, and 26 touchdowns to 8 interceptions, that's not too bad, given what he had to work with in Denver and, basically a franchise that regrets paying him up for that contract, a coach that he just never really seemed to jive with, knowing at the end of the season he was on his way out. I mean, it's actually kind of impressive that Russ put up those numbers. Will he do better in Pittsburgh? Not necessarily. I don't think it's a more pass-friendly offense, but I don't really care. Can he get the ball to George Pickens? Yes. Can he still throw the deep ball? Yes, he can. In fact, that's where he was at his best. So I do think Pickens will be just as good, if not better. And as far as other receivers who are now competing with him, it's gotten better for Pickens. Deontay Johnson, really good receiver, no longer there. Roman Wilson, no offense, but that's it. That's what they did in the draft. They didn't take a receiver early. They decided he was their guy. I mean, he might be a field stretcher, a complimentary piece, but I think it's pretty clear Pickens is the alpha in that offense. So I think Pickens' numbers can get better because his quarterback situation is clearly better than what he had to deal with last year. And now he should be getting even more attention from whoever the quarterback is. So I like Pickens to step up, and I don't feel like his draft price is even accounting for all those things because he seems to be going even cheaper than last year. All right, another veteran receiver with a new quarterback. Can he step up to have his best season yet?
I think he can. So I talked about a wide receiver from your team. Let's talk about one from my team, and that is Terry McLaurin of the Commanders. It's really weird and almost like mind-boggling when I looked. He has never once in his career averaged over 15 PPR points per game for a season. And when you look at the last 3 years, 12.6, 13.5, and 12.3 points per game. That's not very good. I mean, it's not like a bust, but it's like wide receiver 3 flex type of range. But also, look who he had to play with. Carson Wentz, when's the last time Carson Wentz even took an NFL snap? Taylor Heineke, who's nothing more than a backup, and Sam Howell, who will probably be nothing more than a backup pretty soon here. So, horrible quarterback play. Now he gets Jaden Daniels, and I know what people are going to say. I know the comments that are coming already. He's a rookie. I'm not going to trust some rookie. That's fine. That's fair. I get that. But you have to understand, Jaden Daniels in college was a great passer, an incredibly accurate passer, and a great deep ball passer. That is what excites me about Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin is going to get open down the field, and Jaden Daniels is actually going to be able to hit him and connect on those big plays that we haven't seen for years from Terry McLaurin. Sure, every now and then, 1 week out of the blue, he'd catch a long touchdown, but that would be it. We're going to see it more often this year with Jaden Daniels, with that arm that he has. And Jaden Daniels brings a dimension to this offense, that running, that's going to help the offense. So we're going to finally see a better Commanders offense, a better Terry McLaurin. And when you look at the pass catchers here, they haven't really done anything to worry me. Like Curtis Samuel, I know is not a big target monster, but he's a decent wide receiver. He's gone. And all they did was draft Luke McCaffrey, who, with all due respect to the McCaffrey family, not my favorite prospect in this year's draft, to put it mildly. So I think Terry McLaurin puts together his best season this year. He's still only 28 years old. Don't forget, just a few years ago, we saw Cooper Kupp at 28 years old have an absolutely elite season, his best season ever. And a couple years ago, we saw the same thing with Stephon Diggs on his age 28 season. It happens often. This is kind of like the peak year for wide receiver, and then they start to trend down a little bit. So no reason why Terry McLaurin can't have a monster year this year with a new QB who can actually throw the deep ball. Terry McLaurin poised to finally, after all this time, be a breakout wide receiver 1.
Well, I just talked about George Pickens in Pittsburgh. Let's go to his former teammate, Deontay Johnson. Now in Carolina, how could this possibly lead to his best season in fantasy? Well, let's look at what happened last year. Not good things for the Carolina passing game, right? Bryce Young is already being declared a bust by a ton of people. But look, it's going to get better. I promise it's going to get better. Not just because it can't get worse, but we've got a new coaching staff, thankfully. And they brought in what could be a true number 1 receiver for him in Deontay Johnson. Now, look at last year's receiving core for Carolina. You had a rookie in Jonathan Mingo who was probably drafted too high and was miscast as an outside receiver. But when you talk about Adam Thielen, you may recall that at one point, a few weeks into the season, he was the number 1 fantasy receiver because he was getting so many targets, and he wound up finishing top 10 in targets overall last year. They finally, toward the end of the season, started to go away from him because they realized maybe this isn't just the best strategy for us. Instead of just peppering that slot receiver over and over again, maybe we should try to spread it around. So they tried something different, found different ways to lose. It didn't work, but it doesn't matter because now they got Deontay Johnson to fill the void. He can do an even better job than Adam Thielen. Deontay Johnson, believe it or not, is actually an elite receiver. If you look at reception perception, which is, again, a resource we trust highly, Deontay Johnson is all green. All right, you can figure out what that means. That means he's highly effective at every single route. All right, so whatever he's doing out there, whatever you ask him to do, he's going to do it. He's going to do it well. So whether you think Bryce Young is going to be a franchise quarterback or not, it doesn't matter. Just through sheer target volume, Deontay Johnson will be a fantasy stud. Do you think Young gets a little bit better? I think Johnson will be happier now because he clearly wasn't that happy being in Pittsburgh, which is why he wanted out. This seems like a perfect marriage here in this situation. Johnson doesn't need to get those big, deep, long plays like a guy like George Pickens does, but Johnson, I think, is going to be one of the leaders, again, in targets and receptions, and he's going to be a lifesaver for Bryce Young in that franchise, but he might also be a lifesaver for your fantasy team. Any of those players, maybe all of them, could wind up being number one receivers for fantasy this year. You want to know who might do that at running back? Well, we got you covered there too.